A deep dive on John Collins, looking at 4 years of basketball. Is it just three-point shooting, or are there other things that led to a disappointing year in Atlanta? And what can Utah Jazz expect? And how should we use him? It's all coming up on today's edition of Locked on Jazz. Pow.
You are Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider, and this is Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Today on the show, using B-Ball Index, as we have all week long, I look at the last 4 years of John Collins in Atlanta. How was he used? What are his strengths? What was the variation from one year to the other? What does it tell us on how the Jazz could use him and how he can be best served to be a member of the Utah Jazz? And what do we really get? I'll dig into it more as we continue. Pretty interesting little exercise. Took a while to put together, so hopefully you'll enjoy it. I am David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thank you for making Locked on Jazz the first listen, joining in with us each and every day. And to the everydayers who are here, thank you for making the show drive. We are free and available on all podcasting apps as well as on YouTube. So please, 5-star reviews are appreciated. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is the official sports book of Locked On. Make every moment more at FanDuel. It's also brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA to enter your promo code LockedOnNBA for a free white tech hat with any purchase. You don't want to take your bird dogs off, we promise you. It's true. They're great. All right. So here's what I've done. I went through John Collins' 4 years of play at Atlanta to see, using our friends over at B-Ball Index, who do have great stuff, to see like what is really going on. And here's what I think is interesting that I'm watching happen with John Collins. There's a huge amount of optimism, like huge amount of optimism, which I think is great. Like I'm a fan. John Kiefer, I think it was, wrote a piece like of how we create the next Lowry, Markin, and Jump over on Salt City Hoops. And he was honest about it. It was like, okay, we're super excited. Some of the optimism is great. Some I find a little guided in just kind of who he is. So I thought this would be great. If we have 4 years worth of data, we can see where the variances are and say, okay, these are the areas where he struggled. Can we get those to improve? And these are areas where he just hasn't been good forever, or he has been good forever. And it gives us a really good variance. So I went through, and if you're on the YouTube, you can see the screen. It's pretty small. And I went through about 20, let's see, I can tell you exactly how many because I can do math. I went through 36 different categories on B-Ball Index and looked at them over the 4-year run. So the first thing is just how he was used. So 4 years ago, when Atlanta's not very good and he averages 20 and 10, he's in the 92nd percentile of touches per game. So he's getting 68 touches a game. By last year, he's getting 42 touches per game. That's a 33% decrease in the amount of times he touched the ball per game. That's pretty crazy. And that's got to be frustrating. 68 to 52, and then last year to 42. The percentage of time he touched the ball in the year where he's at 21 and 10, and they were not good. He put up big numbers. He had 11% touch time. Last year, he had 7.9% touch time. So even when he was on the floor and his usage was down, or his touches were down, his amount of percentage on the ball was just way down. So Atlanta moved away from giving him the ball. Probably got better players. Probably didn't want to use him the same way. Frankly, got Clint Capella and turned him into a power forward, as we'll see here. in a second. And I think, let me just skip to that because I think that's actually really, really important. This will be my biggest theme. And my number one takeaway is that he should play center for us, which is as Walker's backup. That's where he's been at best. If you look at his defensive matchups over the 4 years, 4 years ago, he played 39% of his time as a center, defending centers. Again, they weren't good. So there's some level where maybe that's not the answer for him as a starter. And if he comes off the bench and he backs up Walker, plays some other minutes also, then maybe he's better against backup centers, is my hope. He played 35% of the time defensively against power forwards 3 years ago, where they hit him. They didn't let him guard good. What's interesting here is the 6, if you're watching the screen, is that he most of the time he defended tier 6 offensive players. And then in defensive matchups 3 years ago was tier 6 or tier 4. Then in the last 2 years, they've actually made him defend a little bit more. In fact, he dealt with tier 1 or tier 2 defenders 2 years ago and tier 3 or tier 4 offensive players the year before, last year. So in the last 2 years, they've actually made him defend in Atlanta at a higher rate. And we'll walk through some more of this to see. So if you look at his defensive positional versatility, he's always been kind of a little bit above average. He can float between the 4 and the 5. So there's a strength of his. His matchup difficulty defense, this is what I was talking about. 4 years ago was a D. 2021 was a D. And then the last 2 years, he kind of moves to average at a C+. Big jump, actually, from the 28th percentile to the 58th. So in the last 2 years, one of the bigger things that landed is when he was on the floor, he actually defended decent players. Now, we've all talked about his three-point shooting a ton. And it is certainly the bellwether in a lot of ways to what makes John Collins successful or not, as it does with many players. But I think there actually might be a little bit more to it. If you just look at John Collins, his three-point shots per game is 3.6, 3.3, 3.3, and 3.4. So, yes, it's a big deal, but it's not like he's taking 50 or 60% of his shots as threes. He's taking, on average, about 2.5 of 11 shots as threes. So there's a little bit more to this in John Collins' offensive effectiveness than just three-point shooting. In fact, if you look at his two-point shooting over the last 4 years, it's been 64%, 62%, 59%, and 60%. In the last year, he just took a lot fewer of them than he had prior. So, sorry, I have a bunch of, I don't know if that audio is coming into you. It's hard to play Basketball Reference because they're the greatest site ever, but they do constantly play ads. So if we look at John Collins' three-point shooting, last year, 31 percentile at D. And in the 3 previous years, 4 years ago, it's an 87 percentile as an A-. Then it's a 85 percentile A-. And then 2 years ago, it does slip to 67% along the way. And then last year, it slips even worse and becomes into the, I'm just trying to make it a little bigger for you on your screen if those of you were following. It comes a D. So where and why and what's the difference? Let's dig into the three-point shooting here for a second. So last year, he did not hit a pull-up three. And frankly, over the 4 years, his grades on pull-up threes are in the 20 percentile F, 28 percentile D. He has a 2021 year, he spikes to a B-, probably not on a lot of attempts. And last year, he does not make a pull-up three. So he is a exclusively catch and shoot three-point shooter. And that has been on a steady decline for 4 years in a row. 89 percentile for an A-, 79 percentile for a B+, 58 percentile for a C+, and 28 percentile for a D. So the big story has been the finger. Certainly it's accelerated last year, and maybe that's the case. But there does seem to be an overall general decline in three-point shooting from 1 year to the next on his catch and shoot. It does not seem to have much to do with whether he's open or not. His openness rating over those years, 93rd percentile, 89th percentile, a weird 49th percentile for 21-22, and then last year, 81st percentile. And his three-point shooting quality has actually gone inverse to whether he's making them or not. In fact, the year in which he was at catch and shoot was at 89% was his 1920, 4 years ago, was his lowest openness rating at 65th percentile. Then he goes to 73rd percentile. Then he goes to the 82nd percentile. Last year, he's just not guarded. He starts missing enough, he's not guarded. So there's a finger element to this, but I think there's actually really a mental aspect to this as much as anything. When I see the catch and shoot decline go from 89 percentile to 79 percentile to 58 percentile to 28 percentile, certainly the finger that we've all seen pictures of and has exacerbated this. But it does kind of initially look to me on this a little bit like, maybe there's just a confidence drop and maybe that can come around. He's a dead-eye corner three shooter is what I've heard from so many people. This is not true, and we'll dig into that when we continue here in a second on Locked On Jazz. Today's show is brought to you by my good friends over at Murdoch Hyundai, located at 4646 South State Street. I'm heading there actually just in a minute to drop off my daughter's car before we let her take it to college, and she make sure it's all safe. So I'm going to be dealing with the service department at Murdoch here in just a few minutes. And it's always a pleasure because that's the no regrets experience that you get with the Murdochs. And then you add the Hyundai car, which has the incredible SUV lineup, kicked off with the Palisade, all to the Kona all the way. In the middle is the Tucson and the Santa Fe. The electric cars have won numerous awards. The SUV Motor Trend Car of the Year is the Ioniq 5. The Ioniq 6 is the car of the year. And you have the sedan, the Sonatas, and the Elantras. It's all at Murdoch Hyundai. Bang for the buck. There's nothing that matches it. Go check it out. If you're going to stop by Murdoch Hyundai, please let me know first. Email me at dlock09@gmail.com so I can take a second and make sure that I give you the VIP experience that you deserve as being a part of Locked On Jazz and that we get with our good friends over at Murdoch Hyundai, located at 4646 South State Street, also in Logan and in Linden. Today's show is also brought to you by Intercap Lending. That means we're talking Steve Carter. Love Steve Carter. Intercap lending office in Utah and beyond. They can help you if you're outside of Utah as well. And Steve Carter is simply the best customer service person I can ever put you in touch with. Intercap Lending's made their name growing from just 15 branches 4 years ago to continue and just expand because they get deals done. They're hyper responsive. They embrace change, and the borrower experience is a unique one. And Steve Carter's our own personal loan officer. I've sent our COO there. I've sent our director of operations there. I've been to him twice. Every single person who's ever worked with Steve Carter through our company thinks it's amazing. He's simply the best customer service. Again, email me and let me have the direct connection to get you started. Or you can call yourself if you don't want me in your personal business at 385-800-8528. That's 385-800-8528. Intercap Lending, NMLS number 190465. For more information, visit intercaplending.com. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. It is greatly appreciated. And thanks to all of you 5-star reviews. Tomorrow or Monday, we'll come back with a program. We'll keep looking at some of these different basketball index. And also, I'm going to try to get the interview series started here as well. So let us take a back to the screen and look at what we've been looking at here. So the one thing I think is interesting, and maybe I missed this, I think everyone thinks that John Collins is a corner three shooter. Really turns out he's been a better above the break 3-point shooter, which I think makes him a really interesting ability to play the 5 because you don't need to go hide him in the corner. In fact, his corner three shooting's not been elite. He's 52 percentile 4 years ago in his best year, 62 percentile B- as a 2021, 43rd percentile C- in 21-22, and 30 percentile as a D for a corner three shooter in 22-23. His above the break 3-point shooting in 1920 was in the 90th percentile as an A-, in the 89th percentile in 2021 as an A-, and in 21-22 was a B+. So there is maybe, I think of it kind of, and this is what I think he became in Atlanta, was this corner three shooter that wasn't guarded. And we talked about his openness rating and his 3-point shot quality a few minutes ago. Those definitely was the case by the end of he's not guarded. Like his openness rating was 88 percentile A- last year. And the years prior, it was back there in 21-22. It wasn't. So, I look at this 3-point shooting and I think there's more versatility to the shooting than maybe has been talked about. I do think the finger might be less of it than has been talked about, that there is a kind of general progression decline of confidence. And it will be interesting, and it's vital that he pulls out of it. right? Like that's the vital key to him. There's some other interesting things. Like there's some skill sets here that now we get some real consistency to who he is. The 3-point shooting has had wild variance. Total isolations for 75 possessions. This is also what he really does offensively. And this is probably pretty important on an offense that does not have a lot of shot creators. We do not have a lot of guys that are going to go in there and get shots for other guys right now. And so he is isolation percentage for 75 possessions over the last 4 years, a B, an A-, an A-, and a B+. So high level total isolations for 75 possessions. Then his effective field goal percentage on those, B+, A-, B, B+. So this is really an area where I think you can go give him the ball at 15 to 17 feet and see whether or not you get something out of him. He's not a foul drawer in those circumstances. His foul drawing over the last 4 years is D+, C+, C-, and C. This is very consistent. And his isolation turnover rate 4 years ago is an F, C+, C, and C. So he's gotten a little bit better at not turning it over. But I do think when you're talking about John Collins here, there is some level. Get him isolations, things of that nature. Get him in that position. Let him just go make a play. What's interesting, and what we tried to do with Lowry last year is we turned him into a little bit of a driver. This is not something John Collins has ever been. Again, this is where there's real consistency over the last 4 years at who he is as a player. Drives per 75 possessions, D, D+, D+, D+. So in the 33rd to 37th percentile, and just not someone who does that. What he is really good, that's a really funny typo here for a second. What he is really good at is when he gets to the rim. And so how can Will Hardy take advantage of shots at the rim and getting him at the rim? So his rim shots at the rim, A+, A-, B, and then he did drop to C+ last year. His rim creation, A+, A+, A-, A-. So till last year, he was a really good finisher. That one's a little he's not old enough that if he was older, that would be really disturbing because that would be a sign of fatigue, of age and lack of bounce. I don't think that's the case. Here's what he's not, though. Not a passer. Like, we're not giving him the ball in isolation and having him go make plays. His driver pass out rate, when he does drive, which he doesn't do a great deal, D-, F, C-, D. And his field goal percentage of the rim, elite. 87, 91, 90 percentile, 94. And his rim shot making, 86 percentile, 79, and then last year, 98 percentile. So the athleticism that he has, if he can get to the rim, he's been elite every single year. He's pretty good in isolation. He's not really driving it, but he's good in isolation, making some of those plays. And if he can get to the rim, his athleticism's elite, and he can create shots and he can finish them. He just doesn't pass out very often. Okay. So these are kind of, that's the core body of what Will Hardy's now going to figure out how to deal with and how to use in John Collins is this. What's another one that's interesting to me on Collins that has some variation, I think will probably increase, is his off-ball movement attack rate. Last 2 years, it's been a C+, but the 2 years before, where he was a little better and actually more of a focal point, it's a B. So I think we'll see his off-ball movement attack rate jump a little bit, where we get him the ball on the move, doing things of that nature, which he wasn't doing before. But again, go back to passing. Just doesn't exist. Assist rate points per 75 possessions, D-, F, D+, F. Passing creator volume, F, 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 D-. Don't expect, we're not using John Collins like Kelly Olynyk. We're not using John Collins to drive and create for guys. We're not using John Collins in the post to kick out to three-point shooters. It just is not something he's done in 4 years. What he is, and this gets interesting. So what we've got so far is his three-point shooting has had some variance, but really a decline over 4 years. Okay? What we have about him is that he's a good isolation player. We have that he's a great rim finisher. Okay? We have that he's a non-passer. That's what the data tells us about what John Collins really was for the last 4 years in Atlanta. What gets interesting to me is when you start digging a little bit into how to use him and what can be best. And this is why I'll explain in a second. I think he probably should play center for the Utah Jazz. We'll have that for you as we continue on today's edition of Locked on Jazz. Today's show is brought to you by Birddogs. All right, I got to give credit where credit is due. Birddogs sent us a pair of shorts. Suddenly realized that I was wearing them more than a bunch of my other shorts. Then all of a sudden realized that they sent us another pair. Now it's the two pairs of shorts I wear the most. And I got to say, I love the fact that they kind of can bounce between. If I'm going to play golf, I could actually wear my Birddogs. If I'm just working out like yesterday, I just wore my Birddogs. And we were on a trip and I needed okay, what's the most comfortable pair of shorts I have that I can just kind of wear around the hotel room? And it was my Birddogs. They're just great. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA. Enter the promo code LockedOnNBA for a free white tech hat. It's really nice. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA or promo code LockedOnNBA for a white tech hat. I should have worn it today. You won't have to take off your Birddogs. We promise you. Check them out. They fit great. There's a lot of brands out there that have this kind of style short right now. It's very popular. But these fit they're the most comfortable ones I have. Way better than regular shorts that are made of stiff, restricting cotton. They're fixed the issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki but stretches and gets way slimmer. That's where I was talking about that. I felt like I can wear them playing golf. And they use an anti-stink, sweat-wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long, which was great when I was on a trip, particularly when I was in Arkansas. It was 110 and miserable, and I could wear them multiple days. It's all at birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA. Today's show is also brought to you by FanDuel. The football season is right around the corner, and FanDuel's got a special deal going on for you. Football season, here's the deal. Pick your Super Bowl champ, and then you get a bonus bet every time they win in the regular season. That's right. This is how football's going to work for you. You pick any team or multiple teams to win the Super Bowl, and you get bonus bets for every victory they have. You can use your bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-under. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOnNBA to earn bonus bets with America's #1 sports book. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Plus, all sorts of great NBA props there as well for your bonus bets. But for the time right now, football season about to kick off. FanDuel is giving you a chance to win all season long because right now, when you bet a Super Bowl winner, you get a bonus bets for every time they win in the regular season. Pretty great. All right. So what position should John Collins play? Does he play the starting power forward like we've talked about a lot? Well, there's some argument here that maybe John Collins should be used differently. Because when John Collins has had his most success, his role man for 75 possessions. 4 years ago, when he's on Atlanta, he's averaging 22 and 10. They're not very good. He's in the 98th percentile in roll man possessions. Goes to 86, he still has a good year. 87, and then last year he drops to 74%. They don't use him that way. His total roll man impact, his impact when he's the roll man, A+ 4 years ago, A+ 3 years ago, A- 2 years ago, A- even last year. Last year he added getting fouled, which he hadn't been before. And is so very successful as the pick and roll man. And this, when we first traded for John Collins, is exactly what I said was the rub about him. Is that on the offensive end, he needed to play center. He hadn't been a good enough shooter for 2 years to play the stretch 4, but he is a great roll man, and you want him as the center. But then defensively, he struggles at the center position to have an impact, and we'll get into that in a second, on the game. And so you want him to play the power forward defensively. And then he ends up having to shoot and play as a spot up, not involved as well. And he just is a total tweener. Well, there's some other interesting things here that lead me to think that maybe more, even with the deficiencies, Will Hardy talks about the superpower. What's his superpower? Well, clearly one of his superpowers is finishing at the rim that we just talked about. A's across the board. And he's a roll man, and total impact as a roll man seems to be a superpower. Those two things are his superpowers. Those get accentuated the most when he plays center. And so maybe he really ends up playing Walker Kessler backup center minutes. Now, does that mean that he could still start as the power forward and then Walker's the first one out and John Collins stays in and plays an extended run there, and then Walker comes back and then John Collins subs for him in his next substitution? There's plenty of ways to do it, as we talked about in our shows, the everydayers, remember, when we kind of went through the various different ways in which you can build our lineups. Here's some interesting things about him as a post-up player. He's not bad. His post-up foul rate was an A last year, 92 percentile. It's a B, C plus, C. His overall post-up impact's been all over the place. 2 years ago, it was 94 percentiles an A. 3 years ago, it was 94 percentiles an A. In the last 2 years, it's been an F and a D minus. And I'm going to think that's because they stopped using him or they had Clint Capella on the floor. My guess is this is key, I think, to John Collins' success, is what was it that created these 92 percentile post-up impact A's? And is this because he was playing center more on a spread floor? So now all of a sudden, if you have him on the floor with Lowry, on the floor with Kelly Olynyk, he's playing the center, on the floor with Taylor Hendricks, on the floor with Luka Samanic, and the floor spread, and he's in the post, can he be effective? Can you get this post-up impact A back? I think if you can get this post-up A back, a lot of these other things, the three-point shooting and the others, the confidence probably rises and comes around with it. The other thing is, as an offensive rebounder in those years, he was really good. And last year, he was non-existent in the 41st percentile. He's always been a pretty good defensive rebounder. A, B plus, A minus, A minus. Here's one thing I was surprised at on these numbers. His lack of defensive presence is pretty telling here. His on-ball perimeter defensive rankings are D minus, an F, a D minus, and a C minus. So if the idea is he's better defensively as a 4, so you can switch him and you don't have to have him playing as a 5 where he's undersized, then he needs to be good at on-ball perimeter defense. If these numbers are accurate, that he's a D minus, an F, a D minus, and a C minus, then he's actually not. And so you might as well have him be an undersized center. He's not an impact in passing lanes. He's not an impact in deflections, D minus and Fs. His rim deterrence is not great either because he's so small. C minus, 6'9", being small for a center. C minus, D, B, C plus. But his rims saved, in other words, using his athleticism once they get to the rim, is not bad. A minus, C plus, B plus, A minus. So what's interesting to me on John Collins from how you use him, and you look at these numbers, is we went to this early. In the last 4 years ago, he spent 39% of his time defending centers. In the last 3 years, he spent most of his time defending power forwards. And in turn, when you end up defending power forwards, let me see if I can switch screens here for a second and give you a different screen. When you switch and you end up playing power forward, you also end up getting switched a lot more, which means that you end up guarding and playing against guys at different positions. So if I can explain what I'm saying here, and we'll look at this on the screen together for those of you that are using YouTube, and for those of you, I'll try to match it. So this is John Collins in his most successful year in the 1920 season is the numbers we're looking at right now. And you can see he plays defense center 38% of the time, 79th percentile. And then he defends power forwards 28 percentile, but he doesn't guard point guards, shooting guards, or small forwards much at all in that circumstance. If you go back to last year, where suddenly he's not playing center as much, and he ends up playing the 4, what ends up happening in almost every defense in the NBA now is you end up switching. And so he's guards the power forward 38% of the time, but his small forward numbers up to 20%, his shooting guards up to 11%, his point guards up to 10%, and he's only guarding the center 21%. Well, part of the reason why I'm going to guess that when we look at his on-ball perimeter defense, it's a C minus, and his loose ball, his pickpocket rate's a D plus, and his passing lane's an F, and his deflections are an F, and his off-ball chasers defense is a D minus, is because of the fact that he, in his screen navigation's a D, and his screener mobility defense is a C, is he ends up guarding point guards, shooting guards, and small forwards at a higher rate. I mean, you put that number together, he's actually guarding point guards, shooting guards, and small forward 38% of the time, a power forward 38% of the time, and a center 21% of the time. If he plays center, certainly he's not as big, but you can play 5 out, you can play him some isolation, and you can do some things with him where maybe it's not as big a deal. If you look at when 2 years ago, or maybe is this 2 years? What year is this? This is 2 years ago. He doesn't get caught nearly as much. He's a power forward 41% of the time, and he's guarding the point guard, shooting guard, and small forward about 29% of the time. Well, that led to a little bit better defensive numbers. And if we go to 4 years ago, when he really was Atlanta's center, and again, I do think it's important. Like, I'm not saying this is his primary thing because, frankly, Atlanta wasn't very good. But you look at him here, and it's about point guards about 33, power forwards at 28, or guards are at about 30%, 32%, power forwards at 28, and centers at 38%. It puts him in a better position. He was 100% over 103% of average doing that. So I think there's a real answer that John Collins could become our backup center. Now, how he starts today, I'm not entirely sure, but that as the backup center, he becomes at the rim more. He can play isolation and spread floor more. He can use his rim deterrence more. He's not a great passer. Maybe it's open enough he passes, but if he's not a great passer, he's not a great passer. It's less crowded and lets him make better plays. And maybe that's the better way to use him as Walker's backup. And maybe he's closing certain matchups as our center. And that's your way you're using John Collins, at least according to these numbers. And then you're not as reliant on this 3-point shooting that does have this great variance and has been on a dip over the years. All right, that's my takeaway for the day. Hope you enjoyed it. Deep dive on John Collins. Have a great one. Thanks for tuning in.